The snow outside fell gently, coating the streets of the quiet suburb in a soft, white blanket. Inside their warm little home, Isabella moved gracefully between the kitchen and the dining room, her one hand resting on her round belly and the other carefully adjusting the red napkins she had folded into perfect little Christmas trees. At 28 years old, she carried a glow that came not just from pregnancy, but from a hopeful heart. This Christmas Eve felt like a chance, maybe even a miracle, to fix what had slowly been drifting apart. The scent of cinnamon glazed ham filled the air, and the table was set for two with delicate china they hadn't used since their wedding anniversary. Fairy lights danced along the windowpane, reflecting the sparkle in Isabella's brown eyes. She'd spent hours preparing this moment, not just the dinner, but everything. Tonight wasn't just about celebrating the holiday, it was about reigniting something between her and Ryan that had begun to dim. She glanced at the clock. 6:42 p.m. Ryan said he'd be home by 6. She tried not to let the worry settle in her chest. He'd been so busy lately, meetings, calls, emails late into the night. She told herself it was just stress. That's why he was so distant. That's why his kisses had become quick pecks, why his touch no longer lingered. But he loved her. He had to. They were about to have a child together. That meant something, didn't it? Isabella ran her fingers along the small box wrapped in silver paper and tied with a red bow, his gift. Inside was a tiny onesie that said, "Daddy's favorite," along with a handwritten letter she'd poured her heart into. It talked about how excited she was for the baby, how much she still believed in them, and how Christmas was the perfect time to start again. She imagined the smile on his face, the tears he might try to hide, the way he'd pull her close like he used to. But as she lit the final candle on the table, a cold breeze of doubt slipped in through the cracks of her mind. Lately, his eyes didn't look at her the same way. His phone calls ended abruptly when she entered the room. His hugs felt like obligations, not affection. Still, she held on to hope. Christmas was magical. Maybe tonight would be, too. The clock struck 9:15 p.m. when Isabella finally heard the familiar sound of keys jingling at the front door. She rushed to the mirror, smoothing a stray strand of hair, checking her appearance one last time. Her hands trembled slightly, half from nerves, half from excitement. Tonight had to matter. Ryan stepped inside, his coat dusted with snow, and immediately shook it off like he couldn't wait to be anywhere else. His eyes, once warm and golden, looked cold, restless. "Hey," she said softly, stepping toward him with a smile. "I kept everything warm for you." He didn't respond, only grunted and walked past her into the living room. He tossed his keys on the coffee table and sank into the couch like a man burdened by a world far heavier than she understood. Isabella followed, the smile faltering on her lips. "I made your favorite," she tried again, sitting beside him. "Honey-glazed ham, rosemary potatoes. And I got you a little surprise." He let out a short, bitter laugh, eyes still locked on the dark TV screen. "A surprise? Great." She froze for a second, heart tightening. "Ryan, what's going on? You've been so distant lately. I thought tonight." "I'm not staying, Isabella," he interrupted bluntly, turning to face her. "I only came to get a few things." Her heart stopped. "What do you mean?" He stood up, pacing the room now, rubbing his forehead with frustration. "I can't do this anymore. I've been pretending for months. And I'm tired. I don't want this life, not the house, not the marriage, not even," he paused, glancing at her belly, the child growing inside her. "I didn't ask for any of this." Isabella stared at him, eyes wide with disbelief, her breath caught somewhere between a gasp and a sob. "You're leaving me? Now? On Christmas Eve?" He didn't look guilty. He didn't even look sorry. "I've been seeing someone else," he said flatly. "Her name's Tiffany. And I'm going to her place tonight." Her hand flew to her mouth, as if to hold back the scream building in her throat. "You're in love with someone else," she whispered. "And you're telling me this now?" "I didn't plan to," he muttered, grabbing his coat again. "But I couldn't fake it anymore. Look, you'll be fine. You're strong. Your family's nearby. You'll figure it out. My family's gone, Ryan, she said, barely able to get the words out. It's just you and me. He paused at the door, offering nothing more than a tired shrug. Not anymore. The door closed with a quiet finality that roared in her ears. The silence that followed was deafening. Isabella stood frozen, still holding the tiny wrapped box in her hands, the one with the onesie and the letter she never got to give him. The lights around the window blinked cheerfully, unaware that her world had just crumbled. She stumbled backward, the air suddenly thick and unbreathable. Her knees buckled, and she fell onto the couch, gasping for air as tears poured down her face. Her sobs were raw, painful, echoing through the empty room like cries from a broken soul. Outside, the snow had begun to fall in heavier flurries, coating the sidewalk in a smooth, endless white. Inside, Isabella pressed her face into her hands, her body shaking. Her baby kicked inside her, sensing the distress, and that only made her cry harder. How could he leave? How could he do this now, with their child only weeks away? She slid to the floor, curling in on herself like a wounded animal. Her fingers clutched the gift box tight, her tears soaking into the ribbon. She had dreamed of joy, of a Christmas miracle, of laughter and reconciliation. Instead, she was alone. Abandoned. On the night meant for love and togetherness, she had nothing but the sharp sting of betrayal and the cold silence of an empty home. The snow outside fell heavier, as if the sky itself mourned with her. The silence in the house gnawed at Isabella's sanity. Every corner reminded her of him. The half-drunk mug of coffee on the counter, his slippers by the door, the soft imprint of his body on the couch where he had just shattered her heart. She sat motionless on the floor for what felt like hours, her tears dried but her soul still unraveling. Her chest felt heavy, like something sacred had been ripped from within her. She could feel her baby shift uncomfortably, sensing her pain, and that only intensified the hollow ache. Without really thinking, Isabella grabbed her coat from the hallway and wrapped it around her trembling body. The air was frigid as she stepped outside, but she didn't care. The snow fell steadily, swirling around her like a silent storm. The neighborhood glowed with Christmas lights and the muffled sounds of joy from nearby houses, all of which only deepened her isolation. She walked without direction, her boots crunching against the fresh layer of snow, her mind spinning in a fog of betrayal, confusion, and heartbreak. She passed houses with decorated trees visible through the windows, families laughing, exchanging gifts, children in pajamas eagerly awaiting Santa. And here she was, 8 months pregnant and alone. The man she had trusted, loved, built a life with had left her for another woman on the one night she thought they might begin again. Her hands clutched her coat tighter around her as her vision blurred with fresh tears. After nearly 30 minutes of wandering, she found herself at a small park 2 blocks from home. In the center of it stood a life-sized nativity scene. Mary, Joseph, and the baby Jesus under a wooden shelter, their faces serene and peaceful. Isabella slowly walked toward it, drawn to the image of the mother holding her child. A strange calm washed over her as she gazed at the statue, feeling the ache in her lower back intensify. Then came the pain. Sharp, shooting, almost paralyzing. She gasped and doubled over, her hand instinctively cradling her belly. Panic surged. Her legs wobbled, and before she could cry for help, everything spun. The nativity scene blurred, the snow felt heavier, and then, blackness. From a distance, a man sitting on a bench watched it all. George had lived in that park for nearly 2 years, a quiet presence most ignored. He'd seen Isabella walking aimlessly, her face pale and grief-stricken. He knew heartbreak when he saw it. But when she collapsed near the nativity scene, he shot up immediately. "Hey! Hey, miss!" he shouted, rushing over through the snow. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" She didn't respond. Her breathing was shallow, face pale, lips trembling. Without hesitation, George pulled off his ragged coat and wrapped it tightly around her body. His fingers trembled as he reached for the old flip phone someone had given him months ago. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher asked. There's a woman, pregnant, she just collapsed in the park near Meadowview and 5th, George said, voice shaking. She's not moving. Please send someone. Please hurry. Is she breathing? The voice asked. Barely. She's freezing, he said, tears brimming in his eyes. George knelt beside her, gently brushing snow from her hair, murmuring soft reassurances. You hold on, all right? Help's coming. You're not alone, not tonight. By the time the ambulance arrived, flashing red and blue through the snowstorm, Isabella had lost consciousness completely. The EMTs worked fast, asking George for a name, an ID, anything. But she carried none. Her face, unknown. Her story, a mystery. As the ambulance doors shut and the sirens wailed into the night, George stood alone again in the snow, watching them disappear. He whispered a silent prayer for the woman who had collapsed beneath the nativity scene, never knowing that tonight's tragedy would soon stir the entire city. The hospital's emergency room buzzed with activity as Isabella was wheeled in, her face pale, lips blue from the cold, and body limp with exhaustion. Nurses and doctors worked swiftly, assessing her vitals, placing oxygen tubes, checking the baby's heartbeat. One nurse, a soft-spoken woman named Clara, noticed something unusual amidst the chaos. Isabella's hand was tightly wrapped around an older, weathered hand, George's. Despite the medical personnel urging him to let go, he remained still, tears in his eyes, whispering encouragements under his breath. She grabbed my hand and told me to stay, he muttered. I can't leave her now. She's scared. Clara, moved by the moment, instinctively reached for her phone and discreetly snapped a photo, not for attention, but because something about it felt sacred. The sight of this unnamed homeless man holding the hand of an unconscious pregnant woman, both surrounded by the sterile urgency of a hospital room, seemed to carry the weight of something bigger than any of them understood in that moment. Just as Clara saved Isabella's life through her care, she unknowingly preserved a story that would move millions. Hours later, while Isabella lay unconscious in recovery, her condition stable but her identity still unknown, Clara posted the photo anonymously to a local community page with the caption, "This woman collapsed tonight near the nativity scene at Meadowview Park. She's pregnant. A homeless man stayed with her until help arrived. She whispered, 'Please save my baby. If anyone knows who she is, please come forward. She needs her family. Please share.'" Within hours, the photo exploded online. By morning, it was everywhere. The image, Isabella's hand, pale and fragile, curled around George's trembling one, became a symbol overnight. News anchors across the country ran the story, each headline some version of the same chilling caption. Mysterious pregnant woman found collapsing in snow, saved by a stranger on Christmas Eve. Some called her the Snow Angel. Others, the Christmas Mother. Hashtags like hashtag Save the Snow Angel, hashtag Christmas Miracle, and hashtag Who Is She trended across Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Influencers and celebrities reposted the image, asking their followers to help identify her. "Let's find her family," one post read. "Let's give her baby a fighting chance." Across dinner tables, office break rooms, and living rooms lit by Christmas trees, people began to talk about her. Who was this woman? Why was she alone on Christmas Eve? What happened to her? And who was the mysterious man who stayed beside her? Soon, George's part in the story came to light. Reporters who had visited the park recognized him from descriptions. By noon, local journalists were interviewing him outside the hospital. "I just couldn't walk away," George said, wrapped in a borrowed coat. "I saw her fall near the manger scene. She looked so lost, like she didn't want to be here anymore. I couldn't let her freeze to death. Not her. Not the baby." His voice cracked during the interview. "She looked right at me and said, 'Please save my baby.' I've never felt something like that before. Like she gave me purpose." That soundbite aired on nearly every major network. The public fell in love with the story. In the middle of a season often drowned in commercialism, here was a tale of pure, human compassion, a reminder that kindness could come from the most unexpected places. Messages poured in from across the country. People donated money to cover the woman's hospital bills. Volunteers arrived at the hospital with gifts, baby clothes, even warm meals for George. Still, no one came forward to claim her. No family. No friends. No name. Her face, though now known to millions, remained a mystery. Clara, the nurse who had taken the photo, visited Isabella's bedside that night and sat quietly for a while, watching the monitor beep steadily. She whispered, "You're not alone anymore. The whole world is waiting for you to wake up." And somewhere, beyond the beeping machines and the sterile lights, hope was blooming, fueled not by grand gestures, but by one man who stayed, one woman who cared enough to share, and a world that decided, for once, to pay attention. The morning light filtered through half-closed blinds as Ryan stretched lazily in Tiffany's sleek, modern apartment. The taste of wine from the night before lingered on his breath, and the smell of strong coffee drifted from the kitchen. Tiffany, draped in one of his shirts, giggled as she scrolled through her phone on the couch. "Babe," she called out, barely glancing up. "Did you see this? Some pregnant woman collapsed in the snow last night. It's all over the news." Ryan yawned, disinterested. "People collapse all the time. Probably some junkie." "No, this is different," she interrupted, turning the volume up on the TV. The moment Ryan heard the anchor's voice, his heart skipped. Still no update on the identity of the pregnant woman who was found unconscious in a snow-covered park near Meadowview. A homeless man stayed by her side until help arrived. She's being called the Snow Angel Mom by viewers around the country. Her photo, taken by a nurse just before she lost consciousness, has gone viral. Ryan's blood ran cold. There she was. Isabella. Her face pale. Oxygen tube in her nose. Her hand clasped tightly around a stranger's. His wife. The woman he had left crying on the living room floor just hours ago. He sat bolt upright, his mind spinning. "Turn it up," he snapped. Tiffany raised an eyebrow. "You okay?" But he wasn't listening. The broadcast continued, sharing clips of George's emotional interview and displaying stills of the nativity scene where Isabella had fallen. Twitter screenshots filled the screen. Hashtag pray for Snow Angel Mom. Hashtag find her family. Hashtag Christmas miracle. Then came the kicker. According to hospital officials, the woman remains unidentified and in critical condition. Anyone who recognizes her is urged to come forward immediately. Panic gripped Ryan like a vice. He hadn't expected this. He thought she'd cry, maybe call her sister. Wait, she didn't have a sister. He hadn't expected the entire nation to recognize his wife and demand answers. Tiffany looked confused. "Do you know her?" Ryan stood up abruptly, grabbing his coat. "I need to go." "Ryan." "She's my wife," he muttered under his breath, already halfway out the door. By the time Ryan arrived at the hospital, camera crews were stationed outside. Volunteers carried in baby blankets and care packages. A candlelight vigil had been set up by the front entrance. People were crying, praying, calling her a Christmas miracle. He stepped through the doors, forcing a solemn expression onto his face. A few reporters turned toward him, some snapping photos as he approached the reception. "I'm her husband," he said urgently. "Isabella Carter. I'm her husband." The nurse behind the desk narrowed her eyes. "And you're just now showing up?" Ryan fumbled. I was out of town. I just saw the news." "Convenient timing," another nurse muttered under her breath as she passed by. Whispers rippled through the hospital halls. Staff who had seen the viral photo now eyed Ryan with skepticism. He hadn't been there when she was brought in. He hadn't called to ask about her condition. He hadn't held her hand in that cold park. Yet now, when cameras were flashing and sympathy was trending, he was suddenly by her side. A young intern whispered to another nurse, "That's the husband? Doesn't look half as worried as he should be." As Ryan walked into Isabella's room, the sight of her lying there, pale, vulnerable, tubes snaking across her body, made his stomach churn. Not out of guilt but fear. Fear of exposure. He reached for her hand, hesitating. The cameras would want that. He had to look convincing. He had to appear like the grieving, loyal husband the world now expected. But deep down, Ryan knew one thing for sure: this wasn't going away. and the world was watching. George sat awkwardly on the folding chair outside the hospital chapel, wearing a donated winter coat 2 sizes too big. A nurse had gently suggested he rest, but the buzz of reporters outside and the constant ringing of his donated cell phone made that impossible. The world wanted to know more about the man who had stayed with the Snow Angel mom. He didn't understand the fame, the flashing cameras, or the sudden attention. All he knew was the look on that young woman's face when she collapsed beside the nativity scene, and the soft, broken whisper she had given him. "Please save my baby." When the local news crew arrived with lights, microphones, and the promise of a warm cup of coffee, George reluctantly agreed to speak. He didn't ask for money. He didn't care about going viral. He just wanted people to know what really happened. "She was alone," he began, his voice trembling as he looked into the camera. "It was late, Christmas Eve. I saw her walking near the park, near the manger scene. She looked lost. Like the whole world had just turned its back on her. I recognized that look. I've had it myself." He paused, tears brimming in his eyes. "I thought she was just taking a walk. But then she sat down by the statue of Mary, and I saw her shaking, crying. Next thing I knew, she was on the ground. I ran over. I didn't know what else to do, so I just held her hand. She grabbed mine and said, 'Please save my baby.' I'll never forget it." The reporter blinked hard, clearly moved. "Why did you stay?" George offered a soft, weary smile. "Because nobody stayed for me when I needed someone." The interview aired that evening, and within hours, the internet erupted again. People praised George for his heart, his courage, his humility. Donations poured in, not just for Isabella, but for George. Local businesses offered him housing, clothes, even a part-time job. But not everyone was pleased. That same night, as George stepped out for a smoke, Ryan approached him in the hospital's dim parking lot. He wore sunglasses and a baseball cap pulled low, looking every bit like a man trying not to be seen. "You're George, right?" Ryan asked stiffly. George eyed him. "That's me." Ryan reached into his coat and pulled out a thick envelope, holding it out. "There's 10,000 in here. It's yours. All I ask is you stop talking to reporters. Stay quiet. Let things fade." George stared at the envelope, then back at Ryan. "You're her husband." "I was," Ryan said, jaw tight. "Things are complicated." George let out a bitter laugh. "No. Things are simple. You left her on Christmas Eve. I found her crying in the snow." "Look," Ryan hissed, stepping closer. "You don't know what went on between us. The media's spinning it, and I'm just trying to protect my family." George's expression hardened. "Protect your family? You abandoned her when she needed you most." He pushed the envelope back into Ryan's chest. "Keep your money. You need it more than I do." Without another word, George turned and walked away, his breath puffing in the winter air. By morning, George's story had a new chapter. Someone from the crew had overheard the conversation. A camera had caught the envelope exchange. A new headline stormed the internet. "Husband tried to silence homeless hero who saved pregnant wife." Social media exploded. People began digging deeper. A few digital detectives uncovered Ryan's recent hotel receipts, photos of him and Tiffany at a Christmas Eve party, and damning texts leaked by someone close to Tiffany. Screenshots revealed Ryan had told Tiffany, "She's pathetic. Crying about the baby like it changes anything." Public sympathy for Isabella deepened. Outrage toward Ryan spread like wildfire. Influencers denounced him. News anchors questioned his sincerity. Online petitions circulated, demanding he be investigated for neglect. For George, none of that mattered. He simply sat by Isabella's bedside, holding her hand again, whispering, "They know now. You're not alone anymore." The sterile smell of disinfectant mixed with the soft beeping of monitors as Isabella slowly opened her eyes. The room was quiet, dimly lit by the soft glow of a small Christmas tree someone had placed by the window. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Her limbs felt heavy, her lips dry, her body weak. Then the memory struck like a thunderclap. The cold park, the nativity scene, the sharp pain in her stomach, the emptiness she felt when Ryan walked out. A nurse noticed her stirring and rushed to her side, smiling warmly. "You're awake. Thank God." Isabella tried to speak, but her throat burned. "Don't try to talk yet," the nurse soothed. "You're safe. So is your baby." At the mention of her child, tears filled Isabella's eyes. She placed a trembling hand on her belly and felt the gentle kick from within. Relief washed over her like a wave. She was still a mother. Her baby had survived. A doctor entered a moment later, his tone kind but serious. "You had a severe drop in blood pressure from the stress and cold. You're lucky someone found you when they did. Another hour and, well, it could have gone the other way." Isabella closed her eyes as emotions swirled inside her. Fear, gratitude, pain. "Who found me?" she whispered. The doctor smiled. "A man named George. He's a homeless man who saw you collapse and stayed with you. Never left your side until you were safe." Isabella's heart squeezed. She didn't remember his face clearly, but she remembered his warmth, his hand in hers when the world went dark. Later that day, wrapped in hospital blankets and with 4 tubes still attached to her arm, Isabella asked to see George. He entered the room hesitantly, his hands tucked nervously into his donated coat, unsure if he was welcome. But Isabella's face lit up the moment she saw him. "You saved me," she whispered, voice cracking. "You saved my baby." George blinked, overwhelmed. "I just stayed. You did the hard part." She reached for his hand, this time not out of fear but gratitude. "You're my Christmas angel." That night, Isabella agreed to a short hospital interview. Sitting upright in her bed, pale but glowing with newfound strength, she looked into the camera and spoke from the heart. "I thought I had no one left," she said. "I thought my story was over. But a stranger held my hand and reminded me that even in the coldest night, there is still kindness in this world. I survived because someone chose to care. And now, I want to make sure no woman ever feels as alone as I did." Millions watched as she smiled down at her stomach and added, "This baby already has more love than I ever imagined." The response was overwhelming. Comments poured in. Letters arrived from across the globe. Donations for her and George doubled overnight. She had become a symbol of survival, of strength, of the hidden power in every woman's heart. But not everyone was celebrating. Ryan arrived the next morning with flowers and a well-rehearsed apology, his voice dripping with regret. "Isabella, I made a mistake. I wasn't thinking clearly. But now, seeing you like this, seeing the world come together for you, it made me realize how much I still love you." She didn't flinch. Didn't cry. Didn't hesitate. "Don't mistake attention for love, Ryan," she said calmly. "You left me. And now I've found something stronger than what we ever had, myself." His face hardened, but she had already turned away. "Get the papers ready," she said firmly. "I want a divorce." And just like that, the chapter closed, not with a fight, but with a quiet reclaiming of her dignity. Isabella had woken up not just from unconsciousness, but from the illusion that she needed anyone to complete her. The winter sun had begun to stretch longer across the sky as the weeks passed since that fateful Christmas Eve. Isabella, though still recovering, had regained her strength with remarkable grace. What had once felt like the ruins of her life now looked more like the foundation of something entirely new. With the help of a compassionate lawyer from a local women's shelter, one of the many who had reached out after her story aired, she officially filed for separation from Ryan. But she didn't stop there. The lawsuit for emotional distress followed days later, citing abandonment, prenatal neglect, and public humiliation. Ryan's carefully crafted image as a successful businessman began to crumble under public scrutiny. Court documents leaked online showed how little he had truly contributed to her care during the pregnancy. Sympathy, once the currency he tried to manipulate, was now entirely in Isabella's hands. She didn't care for revenge, she wanted accountability. And most of all, she wanted to use her voice for something that mattered. One morning, while sipping tea in her hospital room, Isabella received a visit from a woman named Eleanor Preston, a retired business magnate and one of the country's most well-known philanthropists. Dressed in an elegant winter coat with a soft blue scarf, Eleanor smiled as she entered and took Isabella's hand. "My dear, you've reminded the world what real strength looks like," she said. "I'd like to help you start again, not just for yourself, but for others like you." Within a week, Isabella and George were moved into a newly furnished townhouse, fully paid for by Eleanor's foundation. George, who had spent the better part of 5 years on the streets, was offered a permanent position as a groundskeeper at one of Eleanor's community centers. More than a job, it was dignity, something he thought he'd lost long ago. Isabella, meanwhile, had found her mission. She used the donations from supporters and a generous seed grant from Eleanor to launch Safe Haven Rising, a non-profit dedicated to supporting abandoned women, expectant mothers in crisis, and survivors of emotional abuse. The organization offered temporary housing, legal aid, counseling, and emergency resources for women who felt they had nowhere else to go. Isabella wasn't just the founder, she was the face of the movement. Her story became the opening page of every brochure, her voice the centerpiece of every fundraiser. She spoke with clarity, not as a victim, but as someone who had clawed her way back from the edge and chosen to reach behind her to lift others. George stood by her side every step of the way. In press interviews, he joked that he was just the guy who held her hand in the snow, but Isabella never let anyone forget how vital that moment had been. They shared a bond that went beyond gratitude, it was kinship, forged through suffering and made stronger by purpose. They hosted weekly dinners at the shelter together. George taught gardening to the children and quietly kept the grounds beautiful. Isabella ran support groups for pregnant women, sharing her own journey and helping them find the courage to walk away from harmful relationships. One afternoon, as she watched George laugh with a group of kids planting spring flowers, Isabella leaned back in her chair, her daughter nestled asleep in her arms. The air smelled of hope, fresh soil, warm bread from the kitchen, laughter. It was a life that, months ago, she never could have imagined. They had both risen from ashes, not perfect, not untouched, but unbroken. And together, they became proof that miracles didn't always come from above. Sometimes, they came from one hand reaching out in the snow, and another that never let go. The studio lights shone brightly as the cameras began to roll, capturing the soft hum of a live audience and the gentle coos of baby Hope, now a wide-eyed 1-year-old nestled in her mother's arms. Isabella, dressed in a graceful navy blue dress, radiated a quiet strength as she sat on the plush white couch beside George. Gone was the pale, broken woman who had collapsed in the snow a year ago. In her place sat a mother, a leader, a survivor. George looked almost unrecognizable in the best way, his hair neatly trimmed, beard groomed, and wearing a crisp button-down shirt beneath a soft cardigan. But his eyes, kind and humble, remained the same. The world had watched him grow, just as they had watched Isabella rise. And now, they sat together on national television, the anniversary of that unforgettable Christmas Eve, to share not just what happened, but what came after. The host, emotional herself, welcomed them warmly and introduced a montage, clips of snowy streets, the viral photo of Isabella's hand in George's, footage of candlelight vigils, news headlines, the founding of Safe Haven Rising, and interviews with women whose lives had been changed by the non-profit. When the montage ended, the audience was quiet, moved beyond words. Isabella cleared her throat gently, her voice calm but powerful. "A year ago, I was broken, abandoned, 8 months pregnant and left to face the coldest night of my life alone. But I wasn't alone, because one man chose to care." She turned to George and smiled, eyes glistening. He looked down, overwhelmed, but deeply proud. She continued, "I've learned that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it whispers from a park bench and offers you its coat. Sometimes, it comes from the people society passes by. The ones they never look at. The ones they judge or forget." The camera zoomed in slightly as she finished, her gaze directed not just at the audience, but at the world. Sometimes, the people society overlooks end up saving your life. A silence fell over the studio, and then came the applause. Thunderous, standing applause. People clapped not just for Isabella, but for George. For hope. For second chances. For the reminder that compassion, even from the unlikeliest of places, had the power to change everything. And that night, the world remembered. Snowflakes floated gently outside the windows, casting a soft white glow across the bustling warmth of the community center. Inside, the air was filled with laughter, the scent of roasted turkey, cinnamon pies, and fresh bread. It was Christmas Eve again, 1 year later, but this time, Isabella wasn't alone. She stood beside George, helping serve dinner to a line of smiling guests. Homeless women, single mothers, their children bundled in donated coats, each with a story of their own. Hope, now a giggling toddler with curly dark hair and her mother's bright eyes, toddled around the room with a plastic Santa hat slightly too big for her head. She handed out candy canes, bringing bursts of laughter and joy wherever she waddled. Every few minutes, she would run back to Isabella or George for a hug before darting off again on her holiday mission. George wore a Santa apron and a warm grin, helping kids fill their plates and cracking gentle jokes that made the little ones erupt into giggles. Around him, volunteers moved like clockwork. Some were former residents of Safe Haven Rising, now back on their feet and giving back to the community that saved them. Decorations lined the walls, handmade ornaments, photos from the past year's events, and a large banner above the stage that read, "Christmas belongs to the brave." Across the country, televisions tuned in as a national news segment aired live coverage of the event. Anchors spoke in reverent tones about the miracle that had begun one snowy night and blossomed into a movement. Safe Haven Rising now had branches in 12 cities, each shelter filled with warmth, protection, and dignity for those who needed it most. Far away, in a quiet apartment with flickering lights and unopened takeout containers, Ryan sat alone. The glow from the TV cast shadows on his face as he watched Isabella speak on stage, holding hope and standing beside George. Regret clung to him like smoke. No one had reached out. His name was forgotten in the story of redemption that captured hearts, except as a footnote in the fall. Isabella ended the night with a quiet message to the camera. "He left me in the cold," she said softly, looking down at her daughter, then at the crowd. "But the world brought me back to life. And this time, the snow didn't feel so cold."